Temilade, is standing in the kitchen all you'll ever do with your life. Alit, Asit, I never betrayed my own family. Family? Maybe you're the only one who still thinks this is a family. Sias, Omes. The spoon slipped from Temilade's hand and clattered onto the tiled floor as laughter and loud conversations filled the room during her mother-in-law's birthday celebration in Lagos. For hours, she had been standing inside the sweltering kitchen, cooking for more than 30 relatives, sweat soaking through the back of her dress, while outside her husband, Obinna, raised his glass and laughed like the perfect family man. But then, she overheard her brother-in-law casually say something that shattered her entire world. Obinna had secretly been building a new house in Ajah for another woman. And the most painful part was not the betrayal itself. It was the fact that for 8 long years, Temilade truly believed that man had been working hard to build a future for their family. Temilade stood frozen for a few seconds in the suffocating kitchen, her hands still trembling slightly after the spoon slipped from her grip and hit the tiled floor. Outside in the living room, high-life music continued playing. Glasses clinked together and laughter filled the house as though nothing had happened. No one noticed that the woman who had cooked for the entire celebration was trying desperately not to break down in tears. She bent down, picked up the spoon, wiped it clean, and continued stirring the pot of egusi soup like a machine. Because that was what Temilade had done for the past 8 years. Keep enduring as if her feelings did not matter. You lied. Her life in Lagos began at 4 every morning, while the whole neighborhood of Surulere was still wrapped in darkness. She quietly woke up to light the charcoal stove behind the house. The smell of palm oil, onions, and atarodo pepper often burned her eyes, but Temilade never complained. She prepared akara, bean porridge, and puff-puff to sell at Balogun Market before the morning rush began. Some days, heavy rain flooded the roadside, yet she still wrapped a scarf tightly around her head and pushed her food cart nearly 30 minutes just to reach her regular customers on time. People often praised her cooking. Some Danfo drivers even joked, if you opened a restaurant, you'd probably become richer than your husband. Temilade would only smile. Because in her house, comments like that were never considered compliments. Her mother-in-law, Mama Nzosdi, firmly believed that a good woman should never earn more than a man. To her, the greatest value of a daughter-in-law was knowing how to stay quiet, serve others, and put her husband's family before herself. And Temilade had tried to do all of that. After finishing her morning sales at Balogun, she rushed home again to cook lunch for her mother-in-law and brother-in-law. Weekends were even more exhausting because Obinna's relatives often came over to eat without warning. The living room would be packed with loud conversations, while Temilade barely had time to sit down and drink a glass of water. The hardest part was not the work itself. It was the feeling that all her sacrifices had become expected. No one asked if she was tired. No one remembered her birthday. Sometimes, after everyone had finished eating and gone home, Temilade was still alone in the kitchen late into the night, washing huge pots by herself. Obinna had not always been like this. When they were newly married, he used to wait for her outside Balogun Market just to walk her home. One time since, when hot oil burned her hand, he carefully treated the wound himself and whispered, One day, I'll let you rest. I don't want you suffering for the rest of your life. That single sentence was why Temilade trusted him for so many years. But lately, Obinna had changed. He left home very early and returned only after everyone was asleep. Whenever Temilade asked, he answered shortly, "I'm chasing contracts in Abuja." Do you think money falls from the sky? She stopped asking questions after that. In Lagos, financial pressure could make many men short-tempered. Temilade kept telling herself that just to comfort her own heart. But day by day, the distance between them grew wider. Obinna no longer ate meals with his wife. His phone was always placed face down on the table. Some nights, his phone vibrated repeatedly past midnight, and he would immediately step outside to answer the call, staying there for very long times before returning. One evening, Temilade accidentally saw him smiling while texting someone. It was the kind of smile she was not seen directed at her in a very long time. That night, after cleaning the dishes from her mother-in-law's birthday celebration, Temilade sat quietly in the dark kitchen beneath the dim yellow light. The old ceiling fan rattled above her head. Her hands still smelled of onions and palm oil. Then she remembered the words she had overheard earlier that day. Brother Obinna is almost done building that new house in Ajah for the other woman. For the first time in many years, Temilade felt afraid. Not afraid of being poor, but afraid that after all the years she had sacrificed for this family, she might have been the only person who truly believed it was still a family. After her mother-in-law's birthday night, everything in the house continued as if nothing had happened. Every morning, good news. Mama Ngozi still sat outside on the complaining about how expensive food prices in Lagos had become. Tunde still blasted loud music in his room and casually called Temilade to bring him water as though it was naturally her responsibility. And Obinna still left the house early every morning, wearing freshly ironed shirts and carrying the increasingly strong scent of unfamiliar perfume. But there are some things that, once seen, can never truly be unseen. Temilade started paying closer attention. She noticed Obinna never let go of his phone anymore. Before, he used to leave it on the table while taking a shower, but now, even while sleeping, he kept it beneath his pillow. One night, the phone vibrated past midnight and Obinna woke up so suddenly he nearly threw the blanket onto the floor. Temilade quietly asked, "Who's calling at this hour?" Obinna immediately got up and walked outside into the yard. "It's just a client. You ask too many questions." His voice was so cold that even Temilade fell silent. Meals in the house slowly became strange. Some nights she waited until nearly 10 o'clock, reheating the food over and over, but Obinna still did not return. When he finally arrived, he would only lift the pot lid briefly and say, "I already ate outside." No explanation, no asking whether she had eaten. One evening, Temilade finally gathered the courage to whisper, "You've changed lately." Obinna slammed his glass onto the table. "Changed how? I'm trying to make money for this house while you sit around overthinking nonsense all day." Temilade lowered her head quietly, but deep inside, she knew this feeling was no longer just nonsense. One morning, at Balagun Market, while selling akara to regular customers, Temilade received a bank notification. At first, she barely looked at it until she realized the balance in their family savings account had dropped by nearly half. Her heart stopped. That money was what they had spent years saving to repair their old house and hopefully one day open a small restaurant for her. That night, she waited for Obinna to come home before gently asking, "Did you withdraw money from our savings?" Obinna paused for a few seconds while removing his shoes. "Yeah, work needed it, but it was a huge amount. At least you could have told me first." Obinna let out a cold laugh. "And who makes more money anyway?" The words left Temilade speechless. Because for 8 years, not once had she kept the profits from her food stall for herself. Every naira went into supporting the household. During difficult months, it was her food business that paid her electricity bills and rent when Obinna struggled financially. But she had never once used that against him. Obinna walked into the bathroom, leaving Temilade standing alone in the dark living room. The sound of running water echoed behind the closed door, while, for the first time in her life, she felt like a stranger inside her own marriage. A few days later, Temilade met Ayomide at a small drink stand near the market. Ayomide stared at her for a long moment before asking softly, "Are you okay?" Temilade tried to smile, but her eyes were already red. She told her about the missing money, the late nights, Obinna's strange behavior, and the growing fear inside her chest. Ayomide stayed quiet for a moment before sighing deeply. "Temi, some men only love women who sacrifice everything until they start believing they deserve someone else." Temilade immediately shook her head. "Obinna isn't that kind of man." But even as she said it, her voice no longer sounded certain. Ayomide looked at her with sadness. The woman who suffers the most isn't always the one betrayed first. It's the woman who keeps finding excuses to forgive the obvious signs right in front of her. Those words stayed with Temilade all the way home. That afternoon, while sweeping the yard, Obinna's phone suddenly lit up on the table with a new message. Temilade did not intend to look, but her eyes froze on the words glowing across the screen. "The house is almost finished. I want to choose the curtain colors before we move in." Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. And for the first time, Temilade began to believe that the thing she feared most might truly be happening. 2 days after that message, Temilade could barely sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the words glowing on Obinna's phone screen again. "The house is almost finished." The house. Not a trip, not a passing affair, but a place to begin a new life. And what hurt Temilade the most was realizing she did not even know when she had been left behind. That morning, Obinna left the house earlier than usual. He wore the dark blue shirt Temilade had bought him the previous Christmas and sprayed on the expensive cologne he once claimed was a waste of money. Before leaving, he even stood in front of the mirror, fixing his hair for a long time. Temilade silently watched him from the kitchen. "Are you going to Abuja again?" Obinna did not look at her. "Yeah, new contract." Then he walked away quickly. About 10 minutes later, Temilade left the house too. Her heart pounded so hard that her hands holding her handbag felt ice cold. She had never imagined there would come a day when she would secretly follow her own husband. But sometimes, people only begin searching for the truth when their hearts can no longer survive the lies. The crowded Danfo bus rattled through the busy streets of Lagos. Temilade sat by the window, her eyes fixed on Obinna's car ahead. The vehicle passed through Surulere, crossed Lekki Bridge, and finally stopped in Ajah, an area filled with newly built homes for the growing middle class. Ajah looked completely different from the place where they lived. The roads were wider. Rows of white painted houses stood behind large iron gates. People walked neatly dressed, and the atmosphere felt calmer than the noisy chaos of Balogun Market that Temilade knew so well. She got out from a distance and quietly followed Obinna on foot. And then she saw him. Obinna was standing in front of a newly built 2-story house that still smelled of fresh paint. Beside him stood a woman in a pale yellow dress, her hair perfectly styled, holding several cream-colored curtain samples in her hands. Zuena. She smiled naturally as she pulled Obinna by the hand into the house, and Obinna was looking at that woman with an expression Temilade had not seen on his face for years. Not cold, not irritated, but gentle. Temilade stood frozen across the street. Her ears rang and her legs felt numb, but the worst pain had not even arrived yet. An older woman living next door noticed Temilade standing outside the gate and called out kindly, "Are you delivering food?" Temilade startled slightly. The woman smiled warmly and continued, "They're moving in soon. I heard that man just bought this house for his fiancée." His fiancée. It felt as though something crushed Temilade's chest. 8 years. 8 years of waking before sunrise to cook. 8 years of denying herself new clothes so they could save money. Miss what? 8 years of taking care of her mother-in-law. New swas, enduring relatives who looked down on her, telling herself that if her husband succeeded, then every sacrifice would be worth it. But now she realized all those sacrifices had only helped another woman walk into a house Temilade herself had never even been allowed to dream about. The Lagos sky slowly darkened. Rain began falling suddenly, like every June storm in the city. People hurried beneath rooftops for shelter. But Temilade remained standing in the rain, staring at the brightly lit house before her. Through the glass windows, she could see Obinna and Zuena standing side by side, choosing curtain samples together like a real couple preparing for a future. No one noticed the woman standing alone in the rain. No one knew that the woman who had cooked for Obinna's family for 8 years had no place at all in the future he was building. Rainwater streamed down Temilade's face, mixing with tears she no longer even tried to wipe away. And for the first time in her life, she understood how deeply it hurts to be replaced without warning. After that day in Ajah, Temilade no longer looked at Obinna the same way. She still cooked every morning, still woke up before sunrise to prepare akara for Balogun Market, still lowered her head respectfully whenever greeting her mother-in-law. But deep inside, something had quietly shattered. Like a glass, cracked for too long to ever be whole again. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing about betrayal is not discovering it. It's having to continue living as if nothing happened. Obinna, on the other hand, became even colder after that day. He barely looked his wife in the eyes anymore. Some evenings, Temilade, he placed food on the tables, and Obinna would eat only a few spoonfuls before stepping outside to answer a phone call with a softness in his voice she had not heard in months. Temilade knew who was on the other end of the call, but she stopped asking questions because some answers become painfully obvious long before they are spoken aloud. That weekend, Mama Godzi organized a small family gathering. because a relative from Enugu had come to visit Lagos. The living room was crowded with people. The old ceiling fan rattled above the smell of grilled meat and hot pepper soup. As always, Temilade stayed in the kitchen from beginning to end. She carried tray after tray of food to the table, then quietly to washpots to washpots, while everyone outside laughed and talked like one big happy family. Eventually, the conversation turned toward money. One of the aunties looked at Obinna and smiled. I heard business has been going really well lately. Maybe you'll move into a bigger house soon. Mama Ngozi immediately lifted her chin proudly. My son has always been hardworking. It's just unfortunate that no matter how hard a man works, life becomes difficult when he marries a woman who doesn't know how to help him succeed. The room fell silent for a few seconds. Everyone knew exactly who she meant. Temilade stood frozen near the kitchen doorway, gripping the dish towel so tightly it wrinkled in her hand. Mama Ngozi continued, her voice calm but sharp enough to wound deeply. A woman who cannot help her husband become wealthy will eventually be abandoned. Lagos is full of women who know how to make a man want to come home. A few relatives laughed awkwardly. But Tunde was not awkward at all. He smirked at Temilade. Sister Timi has been selling akara for years and still isn't rich. Maybe Obinna is tired of carrying the whole family by himself. This time, the laughter grew louder. Temilade felt her face burn, not from embarrassment, but from pain, because the money she earned all those years had never been spent on herself. It paid electricity bills, bought medicine for her mother-in-law, fed the household, and covered expenses whenever Obinna lacked money, even for fuel. Yet no one in that house ever remembered any of it. Temilade looked toward Obinna just once. She hoped her husband would say something, even something small like, that's enough. Or, she's done a lot for this family. But Obinna remained silent. He simply lowered his head and drank his beer, as though those cruel words had nothing to do with him. And in that moment, Temilade understood something deeply painful. A man's betrayal does not always begin with another woman. Sometimes the betrayal begins long before that, through silence. The gathering ended close to midnight. One by one, the relatives left, leaving mountains of dirty dishes piled high in the sink. Temilade stood alone in the tiny kitchen, thick with steam and heat. The laughter in the living room had faded. Only the sound of running water and clinking plates remained. She washed the last plate when suddenly her hands began to shake. Then, without warning, tears fell. At first, only a few small drops. But the more she tried wiping them away, the harder she cried. Temilade leaned against the sink, her shoulders trembling, as she struggled to silence her sobs so no one would hear. She remembered the house in Ajah. She remembered the way Obinna looked at Zuwena. She remembered how this entire family had laughed at her as though she were nothing but a burden. And for the first time in 8 years of marriage, Temilade asked herself a question she had never dared to think before. If she disappeared from this house one day, would anyone truly miss her at all? After that night, crying alone in the kitchen, Temilade stopped asking Obinna where he was going. She stopped mentioning the Ajah too, at jealousy. No screaming. No checking her husband's phone like the stories women often whispered about at Balogun Market. Because after everything she had seen, Temilade understood one painful truth. When a man has already started building a future with someone else, trying to pull him back only makes a woman lose more of her own dignity. But what nobody expected was this. Temilade's silence became the very thing that started changing everything. She no longer stayed awake late waiting for him to come home. No longer called to ask if he had eaten. No longer stared at the clock whenever Obinna said he would be in Abuja for a few days. Instead, for the first time in years, Temilade began making time for herself. At night, after finishing all the cleaning, she would take out the old phone Ayomid had given her and watch free financial management videos online. At first, she barely understood anything about calculating profits, hiding capital or creating business plans. But Temilade studied carefully, like someone waking up after spending too many years living only for other people. Ayomid looked at her one evening and smiled. "You're finally starting to think about yourself." Temilade stayed quiet because deep inside, she knew she was not changing to punish Obinna. She was changing because for the first time in her life, she realized nobody could save her life except herself. A few weeks later, Temilade began accepting small catering jobs for families around Surulere. At first, it was only trays of jollof rice and pepper soup for children's birthday parties. Clean, but her filled with the warmth of homemade cooking. So customers slowly began recommending her to more people. Some nights, she stayed awake until 2 in the morning preparing food for church events the next day. Her back ached from exhaustion. But for the first time in many years, Temilade felt that this exhaustion belonged to her own dreams, not to someone else's demands. Ayomid also helped her record short cooking videos to post on social media. At first, Temilade felt embarrassed in front of the camera. No one wants to watch a woman who sells akara like me. But Ayomid shook her head. People don't only watch food, they watch truth, and she was right. The videos of Temilade cooking while talking about everyday life in Lagos unexpectedly attracted many viewers. The gentle way she smiled while teaching people how to make egusi soup, the way she described mornings at Balogun Market, even her simple natural voice, made many women feel as though they were listening to an older sister or a mother speaking to them. Then one day, the owner of a local restaurant in Lekki sent her a message. He wanted Temilade to prepare a menu for a weekend event. When she read the message, her hands trembled. For so many years, she had believed she was nothing more than a woman standing in the kitchen in her husband's family's eyes. But outside that house, someone was finally beginning to see her talent. While Temilade's life slowly started changing for the better, Obinna's life began falling apart. The cost of building the house in Ajah kept increasing. Zuena constantly wanted more furniture and expensive decorations worthy of the neighborhood. Meanwhile, Obinna struggled desperately to maintain the image of a successful man in front of both women. Some days, he borrowed money from friends just to pay deposits for the house's glass windows. But he hid everything until the lies began crashing into each other. One evening, Zuena called while Obinna was still at home. Temilade overheard him lowering his voice outside in the yard. "I told you already. I'm busy with work in Abuja this week." But Zuena was no longer as trusting as before. She started noticing how often Obinna changed his story. Sometimes he claimed he was separated from his wife. Other times he said, just a few more months. One day, Zuina unexpectedly went to Ajah without warning and found Obinna frantically deleting messages from his phone. What exactly are you hiding from me? Obinna immediately became angry. If you don't trust me, then forget it. But from that day on, the way Zuena looked at him changed. And Temilade, she quietly continued cooking, quietly continued learning, quietly rebuilding her life piece by piece. Because sometimes a woman's greatest strength is not making others hurt the way she was hurt. It is having the courage to stand up again when everyone believed she would remain trapped in darkness forever. Everything began to collapse on a humid Monday morning in Lagos. Temilade was preparing to deliver trays of jollof rice for a company event in Lekki when her phone started vibrating non-stop. At first, she assumed a customer wanted to change the delivery time. But when she saw Mama Ngozi's name appear for the fourth time, a sudden feeling of dread ran down her spine. The moment Temilade answered, her mother-in-law's panicked voice burst through the phone. Temi, come home quickly. Something has happened to Obinna. An hour later, Temilade walked into the familiar living room. The same room that had made her feel small so many times before. But today, the atmosphere felt completely different. Mama Ngozi sat with her head in her hands crying. Tunde paced back and forth restlessly, and Obinna sat hunched over on the sofa, his eyes bloodshot, looking as though he had worn it all night. For the first time in years, Temilade no longer saw the man who always pretended to have everything under control. Obinna had lost his job. The logistics company discovered missing transportation funds over several months. At first, he had only taken small amounts, convincing himself he would pay them back later. But the pressure of financing the house in Ajah kept growing. Zuena constantly pushed him to complete the interiors. Loan debts piled up, and Obinna kept taking more money from the company just to survive another month. Until the truth could no longer be hidden. They said they'll call the police if I don't return the money this month. Obinna said in a hoarse voice, still unable to look at his wife. Temilade stood silently. No anger, no surprise, because deep down she had already known this day would eventually come. A life built on lies can never stand forever. 2 days later, the bank sent the final notice regarding the loan on the Ajah house. Obinna could no longer keep up with the payments. The house had never truly belonged to him the way he had bragged to Zuena, and that was exactly when Zuena left. There was no dramatic fight, no screaming. Just one quiet afternoon where she stood inside the unfinished house and coldly said, I thought you were a man with a future. But it turns out, you were only pretending to be successful. Obinna tried desperately to stop her. Just give me more time. But Zuena only gave him a bitter smile. A man who lies once would keep lying forever. Then she walked away, leaving Obinna standing alone inside the house that still smelled of fresh paint. The house he had sacrificed his entire family to build. News of Obinna losing his job spread quickly among relatives. The same people who once bragged about him suddenly became silent. Mama Ngozi no longer talked about how a woman should help her husband succeed, because now she was the one asking Temilade to sit down and talk. That evening, the whole family gathered quietly in the living room. No television, no loud voices, just like before. Mama Ngozi looked at Temilade, her voice softer than ever. You are the most understanding person in this family. If you help Obinna this time, we will never forget your kindness. Even Tunde lowered his head. Sister Temi, you have customers. Savings, please help him. Temilade looked slowly at each face before her. The same people who once mocked her, who looked down on her food business, who left her crying alone in the kitchen after family gatherings, and now they looked at her like the last lifeline they had left. Finally, Obinna spoke. Temi, I know I was wrong. His voice cracked with exhaustion. Please give me one more chance. The room fell silent. A long time passed before Temilade gently placed her glass of water onto the table. No more fear, no more trying to please everyone. For the first time in many years, she spoke with the calm voice of a woman who had finally understood her own worth. I used to think love meant enduring everything. But if a woman has to disappear just to keep a family peaceful, then that isn't love. Mama Ngozi fell silent. Obinna lowered his head toward the floor, and to Temilade, she did not cry anymore. Because some tears only exist until the day a woman realizes that her kindness should never become a hiding place for someone else's selfishness. After leaving that house, filled with heavy sighs and cold silence, she rented a small space near Surulere and opened her own food shop. At first, there were only a few old plastic chairs, a slow-moving ceiling fan, and a handwritten wooden sign hanging outside. But Temilade's food remained exactly the same as it had always been. Warm, sincere, and filled with the taste of the family meals she had spent her youth perfecting. Then her cooking videos slowly began spreading across Lagos social media. People loved the way she cooked egusi soup while talking about everyday life in a soft and honest voice. Women saw themselves in her. Women who had sacrificed too much. Women who once believed silence was the only way to keep a family together. Little by little, the small restaurant became crowded every day. Some mornings, people lined up outside before work just to buy Temilade's jollof rice. And what moved many people the most was that among those waiting customers was sometimes the very people who once looked down on her. One day, Mama Josie quietly walked into the restaurant, sat in the farthest corner, and silently finished an entire bowl of pepper soup, still singing sats without saying a word. And Tunde, the same man who once mocked her for selling akara at the market, now proudly recommended his sister-in-law's restaurant to his friends, as if it were a source of family pride. Obinna also came back many times. He would stand outside the restaurant watching Temilade move between customers, calling out orders, watching the woman who once silently stood inside his family kitchen, now carrying a light no one could dim anymore. One day, he quietly asked, Temich, can you give me a chance to make things right? Temilade only gave him a soft smile. No more anger, but no return either. Because she had finally learned that kindness does not mean enduring pain forever. A good woman is not born to sacrifice herself endlessly for people who do not appreciate her. And a man who truly loves his wife would never allow her to feel lonely inside her own marriage. If you are still listening to this story, remember one thing. Do not wait until you lose someone who truly loved you before learning how to value them. If Temilade's story touched your heart, comment string and may God bless every woman who silently carried pain while trying to keep her family together.